Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to let everybody know that this portions of this program are being recorded. I'm going to stop the recording and open up the lines after about every 10 or 15-minute segment. But during the webinar, if you have a question and you want to chat me, that can work really well so that I get your question while we're on a certain topic. So feel free to chat me if you don't want to use the chat feature. I'm going to open it up for questions, like I said, about every 10 or 15 minutes after each topic. But just to let everybody know, we are just recording this during the non-question and answer portion so that others can watch it later. So I want to thank everybody for joining. This is the Reopening New York, What New York Employers and Business Owners Need to Know webinar. And it is chock full of information. I've been going a little bit over 1 hour, so I don't want to take any time. I want to get right into it. So this is a little bit about me. My name is Tiffany Donaldson, and I am a business attorney in New York, and I'm the owner of Donaldson Legal Counseling. And I focus in business advising, formation, contracts, trademarks, and employment issues, pretty much anything business related on the transactional side that you need help with, but I do a lot of employment type work. So if you have any follow-up questions or you need individualized advising, then please follow up with me after the webinar and I'd be happy to help you individually. Okay, so here's our agenda. That's why I say this hour is going to be fast and furious because there's a lot to go over. So first, we're going to look at the New York Safety Plan for Businesses. As you're going to see, it's a requirement upon reopening, and we're going to go all the way through it to understand all the parts of it, and not just how to create the safety plan, but how to implement it, which is the most important part. We're going to start off by discussing the legal considerations and why we want to follow and implement the safety plan processes and what it means to our businesses. Then we're going to discuss mask requirements, occupancy and spacing requirements, cleaning requirements, hosting requirements, contact tracing requirements, health questionnaire requirements. Notice the word is not optional. The word is requirements. Then we're going to talk about the optional temperature taking. And we're going to discuss what do you do if an employee has a temperature, what do you do if somebody comes down with COVID, and talk a little bit about preventing liability for business owners and employers. All right, so we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to get going. So if you don't take anything else away from this webinar, please know that this is the required safety plan. Now, New York State put out these requirements as part of the reopening phases, and all of the information that you're getting from this webinar is coming right from this forward.ny.gov website. And I have a major disclaimer, and that is, please know that this webinar is for all businesses in New York. And that means that it isn't for any particular industry or segment. It's really the basics that everyone has to do. Your industry likely has even more rules. And I'll let you know some industries that they already have rules out for, including retail, restaurants, manufacturing, construction, hairdressing, and nail providers. So they've, just to let you know how this New York Forward website works, I haven't figured out how to be interactive with the internet in my webinar yet. But if you go to forward.ny.gov, you'll see there's a phase 1 and phase 2 instructions. And you'll see under phase 2, there's a lot more instructions for businesses that aren't in phase 1. So if you're a phase 2 business, you want to go there. It's been recently updated and check out requirements for your business sector. So I can't stress enough that this is a starting place. It does cover all businesses in New York, but there's even more to know. And so if you don't take anything else away, please make sure you follow up and learn more about what affects your specific business. Okay, so we're going to talk about the New York Safety Plan itself. That's going to be a lot of what the webinar is, because the rest of these things are included within it. So these are the same things I went over in the in the agenda: the occupancy, mask, postings, communication, cleaning, contact tracing, and health questionnaires. So we're going to go through all of them in depth. But just so that you understand, these are all requirements that are coming out of the New York Safety Plan. The safety plan is free. It's provided on that New York Forward website, and you can download it. Just pick any of the industries, and you'll see the safety plan. The safety plan, same for all industries, and you'll see where all of these parts are coming right out of the safety plan. So we're going to discuss the safety plan, and not just how to throw one together, but how to really implement it for your workplace. But first and foremost, I moved this to the beginning of the webinar because I want to set the right framework for employers and business owners. So I just want to let you know that we are not, doing this for our health, for fun, or really to be health cognizant. Unfortunately, we're going to follow all of these rules so that you can protect your business from everyone else, from the customers and from your own employees, to protect your business from lawsuits. And so that's why we want to follow these rules. So is there a consequence to not implementing the safety plan? We're pretty much going to discuss what those are. And can an employer get sued if an employee gets coronavirus? Because the safety plan and the measures are about avoiding employees getting the coronavirus. In order to get into that discussion, I have to give a little bit of an overview of workers' compensation. So all businesses with employees, we all pay into workers' compensation. It's an insurance fund run by the state. But a lot of people don't fully understand how it works. So that's why I'm going to give a little bit of an overview. So workers' compensation is a statutory scheme that came around through the legislature to replace employees being able to sue their employers in court. And the history of it is that employees would have a hard time proving that their employers were negligent in order to recover for damages in the workplace, and vice versa. Employers, once they were negligent, would get large lawsuits, exorbitant, fines and things resulting from these lawsuits, and they could potentially go out of business. And so it was basically untenable. It was creating disincentives for work and things like that. So the legislature usurped the whole process and came up with the workers' compensation scheme. And it sort of benefits both parties. So on one hand, if you are injured at work, you do not really have to prove that your employer went out of their way to be negligent, and so you should recover for your injuries. As long as you can actually prove you were injured, suffered an injury at work, then you're going to be covered. And in exchange for you not having to prove that, employers basically get the benefit that whatever happens to you at work, whatever it is, has been assigned a dollar amount. Any injury you can think of. And that's the amount of money you get from workers' compensation. And so this entire scheme has replaced the general ability for an employee to sue their employer. And the reason I start with that is so everyone can understand, if an employee contracts COVID at work, generally they cannot sue you. And they're going to be, the next slide is going to be the caveat. So generally it's going to be considered either, so workers' compensations go in two ways right now. One way they're going is it's kind of like the flu. Oh, you got the flu, that's too bad. You're not recovering under workers' comp, you're not suing anybody else. You get better and you come back to work. On the other hand, they're looking at cases where people are interacting with COVID as part of their job, like first responders, nurses, anybody working with the elderly or nursing homes. If they come down with COVID from the workplace, they're much more likely to be able to recover under workers' compensation. But the workers' comp's even fighting those claims. And the reason I think it is because once they set a precedent for covering those claims, workers' comp's going to find itself paying out a lot, and they're going to try to protect themselves as well. So this whole area is quite gray right now. But the bottom line that I want you guys to understand is generally, coronavirus is not going to be something someone can sue you for, with the caveat that we're about to talk about. If somebody did contract COVID in the workplace, though, they can file a workers' compensation claim if somehow they're alleging it came from the workplace. And if you have that situation come up, I would reach out to an attorney. if it's the first time anybody's filed one, there's a specific process. But generally, you're not going to be getting sued just because someone contracts COVID. They should be filing workers' compensation, or they may not get any kind of recovery. Another concept is Occupational Safety and Health Act. And this is a federal act, but New York City sort of has adopted this act generally. And so even though the OSHA Act only applies to people with 10 or more employees, anybody that's in the New York City area should really, operate as if this applies to you. And so what OSHA provides is that all employers that count under OSHA have to provide a workplace that is free from recognized hazards that would cause or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And when we're talking about coronavirus, we all know it can cause death and it can cause serious physical harm. So how are you going to provide a workplace that's going to meet the OSHA standard? And then I have at the bottom here that New York City, basically they follow OSHA. They require a safe workplace free from known hazards, and that's under the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Labor Policy. Okay, so taking those two concepts together, what does that mean? Basically, we're left with the obligation that the employer needs to take reasonable actions to create a safe workplace when you have some kind of known hazard like the coronavirus. And so how are you going to prove as an employer that you took reasonable actions to create a safe workplace to attempt to prevent the spread of COVID? So it doesn't mean employees won't get it at work. It doesn't mean that they can sue you if they do. What you're doing is you're going to be taking reasonable actions so that if you got sued, nobody would be saying that you went above, you didn't follow reasonable steps. So the one way that employees can get to employers past workers' compensation outside of the idea of workers' compensation is if the employer was grossly negligent, if the employer took willful actions or, did nothing basically in the face of danger. And that can be used against you because it's about reasonableness. And so if an employee brought a lawsuit claiming that against you, they got COVID, or you have a wrongful death suit, someone died from COVID, they say, hey, my workplace opened, they made me come in, there were no masks, there was no distancing, there was no hand sanitizer, there was no nothing. And then I got COVID, or someone got COVID and died. They can come after you for that. And it's not because it happened at work, it's because you didn't take reasonable steps to prevent it. And that's the distinction. So look at everything we're about to talk about under that idea of providing a reasonable, safe workplace. The state has gone ahead and provided you guidelines as to what is reasonable, and it's the New York Safety Plan. They're saying, do this, and if you do this, you're doing everything we told you to operate safely. And so it is to be safe and prevent the spread, but it's also to show that you, number one, acknowledge the requirements, and number two, are following them. And you'll hear me talk throughout the webinar. The other thing I'm going to talk to you about is how to document that you're following these processes. So the first is to set them up, get the policies in place, make sure you're following them. The next step after that for the employer is to document that you followed these steps. And the reason is that because in court, first of all, if somebody sues you because they contracted COVID and they're going to say you did not take reasonable steps and they want to go after your company, your defense in court is going to be that you did take the reasonable precautions. That's going to be your defense. How are you going to defend yourself in court in a couple years later without evidence? Just saying you did it is nowhere near as good as proving it. And so that's why I want you to think about every log we talk about, every form. Each one of these is gold to you. If somebody did try to bring a lawsuit like this, you're mounting your defense. So think about everything that way. And I think it gives a seriousness and an importance to this webinar that you might otherwise have been like, yeah, we'll go buy some masks. Okay. So I want to give you the real reason and the real incentive to really follow these and any other rules protect your business to show you did what was reasonable. That is the key to this whole webinar. Okay, so now we're going to go through the safety plan. Get off my high horse. And we're going to go over what's required. So the first thing is masks. I know everybody's seen it on the news, but you might have wondered, you know, is it really true? Do I have to provide masks? And yes, it is. So in order to be open, you have to provide masks to your employees. It's required. Now, your employees can use their own masks. That's allowed, but they're not required to. And then anytime when your employees are in the workplace, when they're not 6 feet apart, they have to be wearing the mask. What does that mean? So that means that if they aren't, you know, if they're more than 6 feet apart, they can take their masks off. So I think that's a number one thing to understand, is that that is what New York's putting out through this safety plan. They're drawing lines for you so you don't have to worry. So it depends on how your workplace operates, you know, whether or not someone's going to need to wear their mask all day. But those are straight from the safety plan so that you can rely on that as the reason. One more thing about masks. As we know, you know, so many states are opening right now, and masks are a lot easier to get these days, but just imagine everyone's reopening and trying to keep a stock on hand. It could be really a shortage in masks coming up. And so what you want to do is you want to find your mask supplier. You don't necessarily want to rely on Amazon or your local store where sometimes they have masks, because I have a feeling it's going to get hard. And remember, you have to give these masks to your employees daily. You can't give them back a dirty mask or ask them really to wear a dirty mask. So you want to have a lot on hand. So you want to start thinking about where you're going to supply these items from. You want to start stocking up in case there is a shortage. And the state actually said, you know, well, what happens if there's a mask shortage and you can't give them masks? They said, oh, that's fine. You have to close because you can't provide a safe workplace. So finding these masks can become really important as to whether you're open or closed. So I just want to let people think about that as we think about all these states reopening. All right, so the next major issue, I think this is the biggest one that affects the workplaces right now. Remember, this is phase 1 and 2. You still have to keep your occupancy under 50% of the maximum capacity for the space. So you want to look at your certificate of occupancy for your space, because that'll tell you who and how many people were legally allowed to be in there. Because perhaps you weren't up to the legal limits, and so, you know, your 50% might not be what you think it is. So what does this mean? This means employers need to start thinking through, how are you going to operate with less than half of the staff back in the office? You want to be back up to full operations. So there's a couple options. You know, one option is to think about working people in shifts, if that works for your type of business. Another is to let certain types of people who can work from home stay home. They actually say in these safety plans that they still do not want to encourage people to come to the workplace. They still want you to operate remotely if you can. They want people to come into the office if they have to come in the office to be working to do their position. So that's one thing, one place to start. Another thing to be cognizant of when you're asking some people to come in and not come in is you don't want to do this in a discriminatory manner. So almost anything you can do thinking that you're doing good can backfire on you. So you want to think about who is allowed to come in and why. So if you have people that do a similar position, you want to make sure you're offering them similar options. And if somebody wants to come in, that's better than you know, just picking one person that has to come in. So you want to have a dialogue with your employees, but you want to make sure you're instilling fairness, because it's when you do things that aren't seen as fair, two people have the same position, that's when you can start you know, exposing yourself to liability. Another thing I don't actually go into in this webinar is people that have predisposed conditions who could really be harmed worse from what we know about coronavirus. If you have an employee like this who says, I don't want to come in because if I come in, you know, I might be exposed. If they have a pre-existing type condition where they're really highly susceptible to having a negative consequence, then what they're really saying without saying it is they're asking you for a reasonable accommodation. And that comes under the ADA. If you have this situation come up, you want to consider whether you can accommodate someone like that. And you don't, there are lines on the ADA. So you're not obligated to accommodate somebody, but if you don't accommodate them, it basically has to be sort of impossible to continue business while accommodating them. So if that issue comes up, I would say just reach out to an attorney. So we're getting into complicated waters, but these are things that are going to come up for almost every business. So you want to be knowledgeable and thinking through these things. So the word occupancy at 50%, that brings up so many more issues than is conveyed on the one slide. But I'll keep going because I don't want to take up too much time. This is a lot of information in this webinar. All right. So the spacing. So from the safety plan, it's asking you to ensure 6 feet distance between personnel, but it has this caveat that says unless the safety or the core function of the work activity requires a shorter distance. And so that's a huge out. So, if it's some kind of manufacturing line where you need to be right next to each other, or you're doing some kind of, installation work where you're both holding something up together, you're going to be closer than 6 feet. So they're not saying you have to close your doors if you can't provide the 6 feet, but they're highly encouraging it. And then anytime your personnel aren't 6 feet apart, then they need to wear their masks. And so you want to think about the type of business and the comfort level. I mean, there's lots of people out there wearing masks all day. Grocery stores, working at any of the fast food places, anybody who's as a nurse, they're all wearing their masks all day. It's becoming more normal. But I think there's a lot of industries where people are not going to be interested in wearing a mask all day. And so you need to be really cognizant. And as the employer and business owner, you need to set the rules. So if you institute that they need to wear their masks when they're not 6 feet apart, and you make them cognizant of it and you enforce it, they're going to take it a lot more seriously than if you don't, or if you're not wearing your mask. So you want to think about, being the one to set the tone, because it's your business that's getting exposed. It's your business that's going to get sued, right? So the employee that doesn't like wearing masks, they're not going to be involved when they get somebody sick and you get sued. So you want to be really cognizant about that. And on the other hand, you have to take into consideration the employee and things like that. And there are exceptions for wearing the mask, which go to health reasons and breathing, literally breathing problems or some kind of allergies to the mask. So there are limits to the ways you can implement these rules, but generally you really want to do it, and you want to do it to protect your business as much as to protect the employees themselves. All right, so another thing that's required within the workplace is just like the grocery store. You are required to put up the social distancing markers using tape or whatever you have. Bright colored tape is generally what people have been using to note where the 6 foot spacing is when you're in areas that are of common use in the space that you control. So I've had a lot of questions about co-working spaces, so I'll just bring it up before anybody has to ask about it. And then I'll open up the lines if anybody has any questions about this segment. So in a co-working space, you generally have 2 things going on. On the one hand, you have people who have a shared area where they work for different companies or they're individually employed, but they sit near people who they don't know in a larger space. Or they have what are called hot desks, where everybody just comes and goes and you're not near the same people every time you come. And the third scenario is you have like an enclosed desk or an enclosed office space within one of these co-working spaces. So when you're thinking about the first 2 scenarios where you're sitting near other people, when you're in open workrooms like that, that's going to be on the co-working space to implement these rules because it's their space. So they're going to be the ones that need to use the tape and put up the signs, take all the precautions. So you should see the co-working spaces implementing these same rules. These apply to them as well. And they will be because they know better not to. If you're the company that has their office, an enclosed office within the co-working space, Now it's going to be on you, to protect your employees within your space. So within the office that you control, you need to make sure you're doing your part. So if there isn't any, if there isn't 6 feet in the office, let alone, somewhere that's 6 feet apart, then, you don't need to put any tape. But we are going to talk about next how you need to put up postings. So I'll talk about this slide and then I'll open it up. So the required postings that you have to post if in the area that you control, that you have control over. First, I throw in there the FFCRA leave poster. This is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act leave that's available to everybody, and it's new under the CARES Act. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I have an entire another webinar that I'm going to do on this. I've done it already, and I actually have it. The slides are free on my website, which I'll send you after this webinar. This is a new leave scheme that applies to all employers and requires a certain amount of leave if someone has COVID and for some other reasons, including childcare. It's a really big deal. I don't have time to talk about it. I got really into it on a different webinar and I got behind. I want you guys to know all about it though. If you're reopening, you need to know FFCRA as well as you know about social distancing. And so if this one's new to you, please follow up with me on that one. But other than posting the notice poster, you're also going to need to post social distancing signage. And you'll see this in the safety plan. Now, the safety plan in New York State don't actually give the exact signage you need to post. They just say you need to post. So what does it mean? Whatever is proper for your work environment, they want you to put up posters. So these are some of the topics that you could say, proper hygiene, reminding people wash their hands or use hand sanitizer, maybe near doors, maybe near the restroom. Social distancing rules. Remember, some of these signs say, remember 6 feet, stay back 6 feet. Anywhere where you're going to put the tape, you probably want to put a visual sign, because if you're like me, you might not look down that much, right? So you might want to put, remember, stay 6 feet back at the copier, whatever your workplace is. So wherever it's appropriate. Signs that remind people about wearing their masks or, using PPE, personal protective equipment. And then signs about cleaning and disinfecting. And so I'll be talking to you guys throughout the webinar about this, but I'm offering a legal package that gives you all the things that we're going to be talking about through here, and it also includes a lot of these signs. But if you are going to look for them yourself, they're all over the internet. The CDC has a lot of really great ones. They probably have, all you really need. But you can also find some fun ones, different, like this one I have here is from a different poster I found. So there's lots of different styles and looks. There's all kinds, and the state's not requiring any certain one, but they're requiring you put some things up where appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to give me just a second. I'm gonna pause the. Okay, so we're recording again. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so rules for tight spaces. This is just going off of the rules from before. They break it out. It's all the same. In a tightly confined space, you can have one individual at a time. So, somebody's using it like their office, they're in there by themselves, they can take their mask off. But if there are other people in a tightly confined space, everybody needs to wear their mask, and that just goes along with the 6-foot rule, so that makes sense. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next kind of policy level, or maybe the first policy that we've gone over. Try to pick up the pace here is the cleaning protocols. So from the safety plan, they're requiring that everybody instill safety protocols, including having a policy for when you're going to be cleaning, what you're going to be cleaning, and then cleaning logs. So we'll talk about those in a second. So just go over the general protocols first. So I think these are pretty self-explanatory, but worth going over. So you want to limit the sharing of objects, which means you want to start thinking about things that are shared in your space. And it depends on your industry. Is it the micros? Is everybody touching the same screen to order something? Obviously, entry and exit doors. Do people share computer terminals? Are they touching the same keyboard? And then, you have to extrapolate it out to your industry, because there are so many different industries that could be on the call that I feel bad almost picking any one, but I'm just going off of, kind of like my office environment experience. I literally think of the stapler and like, what do people grab quickly, share, and don't think two things about? That just reminds me of a stapler. And the truth is, stapler, pens, sharing things like that, that's the quickest way to get coronavirus. So we want to be really cognizant, really think through, okay, your workspace, think it through, practice, see what do people touch. It might be something you're not thinking of. And you want to put that into the cleaning policy. And that's something you want to be aware of to be cleaning. And then generally discouraging sharing or making the whole group cognizant about cleaning off if you're sharing. It's really about what you bring to people's attention. And as the employer or as the business owner, you're the ringleader. And they're going to do what you tell them. If you take it seriously, they will. If you don't, they won't. It's how it goes. So I really want to encourage you guys to kind of be the ambassadors of health, because it's not just for them, it's for you. Okay, we're going to talk about the rules for having access to sanitizer or hand wash. But it's you generally need to have one or the other. So you're not actually required to provide hand sanitizer if there's a general access to hand washing in the area, but it's encouraged, why not have some around? So if you feel like going out of pocket for some little hand sanitizers, I would make sure everybody had one, at least access to it. And then how frequent you're going to clean is really the issue. So the state is requiring that you clean the office or the workplace every day. That's the minimum. And if, most offices, you may not have had a daily cleaning person. You might have had weekly. So it can be a big change. So you're going to have somebody that's cleaning every day. You have to designate who's going to do it or who's going to do which area. And another thing to think about is who's going to back them up. If they're out, who's getting the cleaning done that day? So it's more than just the idea that you have to clean. You have to think about how you're going to execute this sort of high level of cleaning standards. And then if you have shifts, they want you to clean between shifts. Minimum. All of this is at a minimum. Obviously, you can clean as much as you want. But the shifts gives you the idea of thinking about cleaning the keyboard because somebody comes in at night and sits there. Cleaning the doors off because everybody's about to come back from lunch, things like that. But the minimums required from the safety plan is daily. So you want to make sure you're at least doing that. And then obviously they point out, the more high traffic the area, the more, you want to be cognizant of cleaning that area. And restrooms is something you really want to pay attention to. Not everybody has dominion over the restrooms that their workplaces use, but some people do. And so if you are in charge of maintaining the cleanliness of the restroom, I would just say to just put a special emphasis on that, because that is one of the places where the coronavirus can really spread. And so the cleanliness of shared restrooms is huge for maintaining a healthy workplace during this corona time. So think about that as well. All right, so I just want to talk you through the cleaning policy and logs. So these are pretty easy, but they're annoying. I'm not gonna lie. So in the plan that I sell, I have a cleaning policy created for you, and you just need to fill in the specifics. But if you don't get that one, you want to do one yourself. You want to think about what are you going to clean, how frequently, and then really importantly, who's performing the cleaning? This might be something you weren't doing before, or the frequency might be higher. And then really want to institute who's the backup, because there's no way that same person's always going to be around. So that's the cleaning policy. So they want you to fix the cleaning policy in writing. And if a health inspector comes through, it's better to have the cleaning policy in writing to say, in theory, we have a cleaning policy. So I know this is coming from the safety plan, so I know it might seem a little extra or a little much, but I would encourage everybody to do it. You can do it on a one-page paper, knock it out, but I highly encourage you to do it. And then the second step of the cleaning policy is the cleaning log. So this is separate from the policy. This is the evidence that the cleaning was accomplished. And remember what I told you about evidence. It's not just great, we have a record. It's your defense in court. If somebody tries to say, I got coronavirus at work and they didn't follow any of the rules, and so that's why they should be liable beyond workers' comp, you need evidence to prove them wrong. And cleaning log evidence is huge, and the more the better. So the cleaning log is really, it's just like you see in McDonald's or anywhere else. You see those restrooms, they have a cleaning log. They're great. They put the time it was cleaned, what was cleaned, and who cleaned it, and then like have them sign and date. The important thing is to make sure you're recording the date, you know, the name and the place. So, you know, you can make your own log. I have the log in my package, but the point is to keep it. And I think a lot of these things are easy to talk about. The concept's not so hard, but implementation, now that's the hardest part. So what I recommend everybody do is you allocate this job to someone or different areas to different people so that it becomes somebody's job to keep track of it. And so that somebody has stake of this. And like I said, ideally a backup. But this is really important because to have a policy is one thing. There's no, how can you prove you followed a policy? Cleaning log, that's how you can prove it. So from a legal standpoint, it's a really good idea. Okay, hand hygiene. So from the safety law or the safety plan, they require that either you provide access to a hand washing station or the alcohol-based sanitizer. Most office environments already have access to at least sinks in the restroom, or maybe even in some kind of shared kitchen area. That's generally going to be fine. That's going to be enough. As long as someone wants to wash their hands, can go wash their hands. That's the point. There are other, you know, different types of work sites, workplaces, off sites that may not have a lot of restroom access, or maybe not the most ideal. And if that's the case, then the alcohol-based sanitizer is going to be on you to provide. So, you know, I don't think this is shocking to anybody, but it's the idea of understanding that it is a requirement as opposed to just a good idea. So that's a cleaning plan. So before I move on to the next requirement, recording. Okay. All right. So far we've had the cleaning policy. Okay. So the next type of policy plan you need is a communication plan. This is also, it's all coming out of the safety plan. They don't really describe what they mean by this in the safety plan. They just say to have one. And from what I can garner, the point of the communication plan is to have a point person to oversee, first of all, that you have the contacts of your employees and ideally visitors and customers. And secondly, to kind of somebody to take charge of this portion. So we're going to talk about a required contact log that you have to keep of people who come in and out of the workplace. And so in the communication plan, you could talk about who is going to be in charge of the contact log, making sure it's out every day, making sure it's collected at the end of the day, ideally keeping an electronic copy of it. But also part of this is you want to send out emergency contact sheets to all your employees and get their updated information. I've been saying, it's likely that maybe someone's taking care of a parent and they're not where they normally are, or you know, maybe they're using a different phone number because they're at a different location and they had given you their landline. So it's a good time to send out emergency contact sheet, get updated, and also ask, you know, about who to notify if something happens, because if they are sick at work and end up going to the hospital or something, it would be good to have that so that you can follow up with them. So I did get one cleaning question, and it was, are there any particular types of cleaning products required to meet compliance? And that's a really good question. So the CDC provides basically the type of cleaning products that are acceptable. And it is such a wide-ranging amount that you almost have to know the name of the cleaning product that you're researching to see if it's on the list. But it is a really good question. So what I would say, the answer is that you need to look on Google, like the CDC and cleaning, and you'll see their recommended products. But you want to use something that at least, generally has the effect of killing viruses, which I would think the individual product would either, boast that it does it or doesn't. And so because the goal in all this cleaning is really to kill that virus, that if you don't have time to search the CDC site, I would say use that as your, litmus test of whether that's a good cleaning product or not. But so that's a really good question. So the CDC recommended products are the ones that they want you to use, but it's so many. It's a whole database of products. So, but that was a great question. Okay, so continuing with the communication plan. Basically, the point of this is really that you just want to have one, and again, you want to have it in writing. It can be one page, it can be simple, just kind of cover these topics that I talk about in here. And then the contact log kind of goes hand in hand with the communication policy. So this is the contact tracing log you hear about on TV. The state's requiring that all employers maintain a continuous log of every person and visitor and worker who comes or has close contact with someone at the work site or any other area for that matter that's related to the employment. So whether it's the office, whether it's a construction site, anybody that's interacting with your employees, ideally, you want to have their name, phone number, address, email, all the contact information you can get out of them. And you want to keep a record really of who they either interacted with, or maybe like if you have multiple floors, what floor did they go to, what division were they at? Because the whole point behind this is if an employee tests positive for COVID, what happens? You have to notify the health department. The health department's going to come out and they're going to say, where's your contact log? And they're either going to have you or they're going to contact anybody on that log, that has been in the same work area as the person that contracted COVID for at least, the last week. I don't know how far exactly they're going back these days. And they're obviously going to want to let those people know, encourage those people to get tested, and potentially encourage them or require them to quarantine. So without this contact log, it's really jeopardizing the whole get back to work system. I know people have different opinions about it. My opinion is it's pretty good because people don't want your home address. The only reason they're asking you for all this information is for your health and safety, and you could really save somebody's life. So the flip side of this is in the safety plan, they say you don't have to get the information of delivery drivers as long as they're wearing a mask or appropriate PPE. And I think they came up with that because they realized it was just going to be a really big hassle. Because I think one of the most common visitors, especially to office sites and things, is at lunch. You can have 20 different agencies down dropping off food, and they're fast and they're not going to want to stop and leave their name everywhere they go. So they did make that exception. And then when it comes to customers, like for instance, if you're retail or you're certain industry or interact with customers, you want to make sure you, like I said, you follow that guidance. That's a whole nother separate guidance. But generally with customers in the workplace, you really want to treat them like anybody else. Ideally, you want their information and it's for their benefit. But they are allowed to refuse. And pretty much anybody can refuse, but your employees shouldn't. If they refuse, then they're saying it's okay. You're not obligated to get their information, but you're encouraged to. So that's the contact tracing log. Okay, so you need to have that contact log near your front entrance or, someone in charge of it, recording daily based on your type of industry. So before I get into the health questionnaire, I'll ask if you guys want to chat me any questions. Because that was a pretty intense segment with the contact tracing. Once again, it sounds easy, but it's the execution of it that you need to be really diligent with. And so, okay, somebody asked, can I go slower over what information I suggest for the contact log? So that's no problem. So what I suggest is you get their full name. So, if you put first name, last name, you're much more likely to get people to fill that in. So I would say first name, last name, email. I say email first because most people prefer email these days. I don't know. Then phone. And then after that, see if they'll put their address. I would put people don't leave their address, they don't. But sometimes if it's on a form, they'll fill it in. It doesn't hurt because, if they're trying to get contact trace and they, you can't read their phone number, they can go to their address to save their life. And then in another column, I really suggest you put who they visited, or depending on, the workplace, what division did they visit or what's the reason for their visit type of thing. So that the reason behind that is we're not in their business. We want to know who do they interact with there so that we have an idea of, where they went. So if it's appropriate, you could say, who are you visiting? Or, if that's not appropriate, you could say, reason, just leave it open. Or what floor. If you have multiple floors, you want to say what floor did they go to. So those are my suggestions for the contact log to keep. One more thing about the contact log. What you want to do is you want to keep it. I mean, it's okay if you keep it ongoing, but eventually you're going to have a couple pages. I really suggest you scan those, because what can happen is if somebody has COVID, they can actually close your workplace. They suggest closing it for like up to 24 to 48 hours because the person may have touched things within the office. And even though they encourage cleaning it, they also encourage closing it for a little bit. And so to avoid having to go in and get the contact logs, it could be a good idea, if you have time, to scan it and save them, if that works for you. But, that's a suggestion. All right, so I'm going to move on. I know I'm probably going to go over. I'm trying to be fast. There's so much on here. I apologize if I go over noon. If you can't stay, like I said, I am recording this, and I'll make the recording available. So the next one is the health questionnaire. So this is a whole major another topic that we're on to, and this is required. This is kind of like a bombshell. I think a lot of people are not aware of this. The health safety plan requires you to collect a health questionnaire daily from your employees before they come into the workplace. Required. Everybody in the state. And there are 3 questions that the state requires. You can choose to put other questions, if there's other concerns that you have, but these are the 3 that you want to make sure you include. So the first is, have they had any COVID-19 symptoms in the past 14 days? I have a next slide about what the symptoms are. Have they tested positive in the past 14 days? Or have they had close contact with someone that's been confirmed or suspected? When you say suspected, you have to mean like, highly suspected that they have COVID-19 in the past 14 days. So this starts a whole nother conversation, which is a whole topic area of how do you deal with these answers and people having symptoms in the workplace. So the next couple of slides, we're going to kind of really cover this area, and then I'll open it up for questions on this whole topic. So the health questionnaire, it's a can of worms, because first of all, you're going to have to execute it. Oh, hold on, my next slide's the symptoms. Let me go over the symptoms and I'll keep going. Okay, so what are the COVID-19 symptoms? I feel like it's hard to say what they are because they keep changing. I thought I knew what they were, but I looked at, this is the most recent list from the CDC as of like a couple days ago. And the list keeps growing. So when someone says, I have COVID-19 symptoms, you pretty much as an employer are going to have to take it at face value, because it's a wide range of things. So they could have a fever, or they could have a cough, that dry cough they talk about. Obviously, the shortness of breath is a concern, no matter whether or not it's COVID. Please check that out. But fatigue, I'm always tired. Am I never going back to work? You see where I'm going with this? Muscle and body aches. I mean, who doesn't have those? Headache, loss of taste or smell. I have to say that one's odd. So if you have that, go get checked out. A sore throat, that's usually a sign of something bad. But congestion or a runny nose, I mean, anybody with hay fever knows that's going to go on all summer. Nausea or vomiting, can occur for many different reasons, or diarrhea. So being cognizant of these symptoms, you can really see how this is a whole can of worms. Does somebody have one of these symptoms, and they have to honestly answer that morning while they're having a headache? They might not. They might say, yes, I have a headache, and then they shouldn't come in. So thinking about how this health questionnaire is really going to affect manpower at work, is something to be aware of. Okay, so another spiel about the health questionnaire, besides the fact that you have to figure out how to, execute it and you need to enforce it, is that it's a health record. And health records need to be dealt with in a specific way. So I'm encouraging people to really only require the health questionnaire to be sent in to either the person's manager or the appropriate HR person. You really want to limit who has access to these medical records. Think about where you're going to store the medical record. You aren't supposed to store it with the rest of the employees' regular work records. You're supposed to create a separate folder for them that is their medical records folder. So each employee should have their regular work file and a medical records file. Then you want to make sure they're getting saved there. You don't want to mix medical records. So you don't want all the health questionnaires each day in a file together. And this has to do with legal issues, first of all, privacy, but also upon subpoenaing of information. Because when all the medical records are mixed together and one person's gets subpoenaed and file Y gets turned over, then now you're exposing all these other people's medical records. And so there's a high sensitivity and regulations around medical records. And this is derived from the HIPAA laws. So you want to be really cognizant of how to store these records. Additionally, you don't want to create a share file that multiple employees can see other people's records. So it's talking with other employers, and people are saying, oh, we could make a share file, everybody just puts it in there every day. Sounds like a good solution, but it has ramifications in that you would have to really police access. So you don't want people to have access to each other. So you got to be real cognizant about how you're handling these. And so I just wanted to bring your attention to all of these issues. And then obviously, if somebody says no, or answers negatively or whatever to one of these questions, the result is that they are not invited into the office, and that's for the protection of everybody else that is invited into the office. Somebody asked, can we go back to the questionnaire page with the symptoms? They want to, sure. Let's go back to the symptoms for a second. Okay, so these are the symptoms, and also this link, I would say just see if you can screenshot, maybe save that link, or you really just Google CDC and symptoms, because these this list of symptoms tends to grow as when you start hearing about the way that it's presenting in children. There could be other things that come up for adults, but this is the current list. And we have another question that said, can you confirm the questions, I think? So let me just go back to the questions page. So when you get the safety plans, everybody needs to download the safety plan. The safety plan is free from the state. You need to go to New York Forward and download it. These questions are in there as when it gets to the health question part. So I'm not making these up. That's where these are coming from. But there they are again. If you want to take those down or take a screenshot, it's a really good way to do it. I'm also going to make these slides available in the future, so you can come back. So hopefully everybody's had enough time to kind of get most of those down, because I'm going to move forward. Okay. All right. So another part of this, keeping the questionnaire coming from the safety plan, is a health questionnaire log. And what does this mean? This is just a record that employees actually turned in their health questionnaire. So this is not really a health record, because all you're going to have is the employee's name, the date. You can put all the employees in a row and say, on today, did Tiffany turn in her health questionnaire log? Yes or no? Hopefully it's yes, because you don't want to invite them in if you don't have an answer. And it's a way to track, but also to show that not only did you require health questionnaires, you required them every day. And if somebody didn't turn one in, they didn't get to come in, and things like that. So uh, this is a lot. As you learn, as you think through each of these, it's like, gosh, this is a lot. It is a lot. And so before you open, or as you're opening, you want to be cognizant about giving almost each of these either to somebody different, or maybe to one person who this becomes part of their position. But acknowledge how much work it is, and acknowledge that this is a new role you really need somebody on, in order to keep those records, to protect you later, and to keep everybody safe. So that's the log. Okay, so the next section is talking about temperature taking. But before I get into that one, and we're getting closer to the end, I know it's already 1, but we're gonna keep going probably for another 15 minutes if you have time. If you don't, I'm happy to share these slides with you guys. So I'm just gonna pause the recording for a second. Recording here. Okay. You guys saw my sneaky answer. Okay. So the question was, can you require employees to have their temperature taken? And I accidentally showed you. And the answer is yes. Okay. So the idea of taking a temperature at work is weird. And generally you're not really supposed to do it. But because of the global pandemic, the CDC basically came out and said, it is allowed, and it's because it's a reasonable step at the door to protect the rest of the people inside. So it's going to be anybody's violation. They are required to submit to it, and you are allowed to do it. But just so that you know, it's not required. So even though you can do it, you do not have to do it. And then, what is a fever? So the CDC says 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. New York State generally repeats at 100 degrees. Somebody's clocking in around 100. That's a good time to go home. Okay, but there's a whole lot of other information around temperature taking. And so the question is, should you require employees to have their temperature taken? And I don't give you the answer. I just give you my 2 cents. And my 2 cents is that because we know about OSHA and we know about NYC requiring, that you do reasonable steps to provide a safe workplace, I do think taking temperatures at the door, or requiring people to take them at home, which we'll go through both of those processes, it does show that you're being really cognizant about health. And so from a legal perspective, as long as you're doing the process correctly, it can't really hurt to do it. So in a way, as you'll see from the next couple slides, I think ultimately I encourage employers to have employees check their temperature at home before they come in. And as part of the health questionnaire, require the employee to affirm that they don't have a fever, at the time of taking the health questionnaire. And that's my suggestion. But it doesn't mean you might not want to do it at the door. If that's what you're feeling like you should do, that's okay too. But we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. So like we said, this is optional. Okay, so temperature check considerations. Where to do it? You really have 2 options. You can either do it at the door or at home. And so if you're talking about doing it at the door, which I mean, when somebody comes into a workplace or whatever your workplace is, these are the rules. So first, you want to have somebody who's medically trained, ideally do it. But if nobody fits that bill, you at least want the person that's going to do it to look at the website of whatever temperature gun you end up purchasing, and read about how to operate the gun, how to test it, make sure it's reading correctly, and things like that. So my spiel on these temperature guns, if you're going to go this direction, is I would get them soon, because everybody and their brother is going to go get them. I would get a couple, because I think the best way to tell if it's reading accurately is to see what the other one's reading. And then you want to be cognizant about batteries, or, unless they're rechargeable, I'm not sure, so that it'll last, all day or week, and the person, the screener, as I'm calling them, they're going to need to be protected. So you need to make sure they have masks and gloves, and ideally one of these shields, ideally some kind of, plastic between the 2 of them if you can. But you want to make sure this screener, who you're now almost forcing to get pretty close to a lot of people, is really safe. So you want to think about their safety too. You don't want to discriminate at the door. You don't want to say, "Oh, that person looks healthy. let me test this other person over here." That's not going to go over well. You don't want to not test the upper management and test all of the regular daily workers. That's not going to go over well. So if you're going to do it, you should just do it. You should do it equal across the board, so nobody feels singled out. To protect yourselves. You want to make it private. So you don't want to be taking people's temperatures in front of everybody else. Now, in stores and things, they're not really being very private about it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. Because the thing is, basically, this reading and what happening in this situation is creating a medical record. And if somebody has a fever and they don't make it past the door and you let them go, it's going to be pretty blatant what their reading was because they didn't make it through the door, right? So you don't want to be giving away their health information like that. So you want to have some kind of divider, some kind of curtain or small, whatever room you can use so that you're not doing it in front of other people. And then if people are lining up, you want to be cognizant about the line, that they're not standing right up on each other in line to get the temperature screening. So it just creates a whole nother, every situation creates 3 more things to think about. It doesn't mean you can't do it, and some places will do it. And so if you're going to do it, you just want to try to follow these rules the best you can. And then we have the fever there again. And then I want to talk to you about the records of the temperature taking. So the question is, should you keep a record of having taken temperatures? From a legal standpoint, if you're going to go that far and take the temperatures at the door of employees, I do think you should keep a record. And the reason is because that's great evidence that you were implementing temperature taking at the door. And if you're sued years later and you took temperatures at the door and you don't have any evidence of it, it's not as good as having all these records that you could redact, but at least produce to show it happened. And another thing I encourage people to do is take pictures. Don't take pictures of the reading, and don't take pictures of somebody who doesn't give you permission. But if somebody will give you permission, take a couple pictures to show that this was happening. Also take pictures of your office or your workspace once it's decked out in all your social distancing posters and tape. Because in a couple of years, if you're sued, you're not still going to have all that stuff up. Hopefully we all have the vaccination and we're back on with our lives. And so taking pictures is a really great way to prove that you were meeting these standards. So I really encourage people to do that too. The con of keeping the record is, of course, the same problem with the health questionnaire record. Is it's another medical record. And so when you keep a medical record, you're going to be really cognizant that you keep it by employee. So you don't want to have, James 99 degrees, Peter's, 98.6. You don't want to have that all on the same piece of paper. What you want to do is create one piece of paper per employee and pull up their piece of paper, and you can keep, their daily log on their individual paper. So you want to keep their health records that separate, and that way you can put their record and with their stuff. See where I'm going with this? So to keep these records, if you're going to do it, you want to do it the right way. And they also say, you don't really need to write down their exact reading. I don't think. I would just really say whether or not they had a fever. They have a fever, yes or no. That's a little bit, less information than needing to know their daily body temperature, which is a bit invasive. So it doesn't mean that you can't do it, but if you're going to do it, think about all these things. Okay, testing at home. Obviously, you can tell from what I've been saying that I think this is easier and so much less of a headache and creates less legal risk for all these other issues that spin out of temperatures at the door. If somebody take their temperature at home and say, affirm that they don't have a fever each day, you can throw it onto the employee questionnaire and get it over with like that. Now, of course, if you have an area that's highly trafficked by visitors or customers, then this might not be the best solution. You might want to temperature test those people, which you are allowed to do. But otherwise, this could be a really good solution. One of the problems with this that I want to bring up is whether you think your employees will be truthful. And I guess it goes to the health questionnaire too. So there are a lot of industries where the employees want to work. The last thing they want to do is miss work because they have a headache or the fever. So the only reason I would say to do it at the door is if you don't think your employees will be honest if they register a fever, if you think they would just come in anyway. If you have that level of confidence in people's honesty, then I would do it at the door, because now that's objective. You know, it's not their choice. It's somebody else reading the reading. Okay, so that was a lot of information about thermometers. And I have another slide. This is the same slide about the records. Don't mix the records. Okay, so I'm going to get into, I'm really sorry this is going long. We're going to get into the really good information about what to do if an employee has a fever. And feel free to chat me if you had any other questions. Let me take a couple questions here. Okay, so somebody asked the question, do the temperature taking rules apply to both employees and business visitors? It does, in the way that it's optional. So if you said you're only going to take temperatures of employees and not visitors, that would be okay. You're not really discriminating. As long as you know you're doing everything for all the employees the same. But if you got it all set up at the door, then I would suggest that it doesn't hurt to take the temperature of visitors, because the goal is just to keep out anybody who has a fever. So if you've gone to the extent of taking it at the door and protecting all the employees, it's not such a bad idea to test the visitors. And personally, I don't think I would keep a log of the visitors whether or not they have a fever. It's just something that you could do and let them in if they're don't have a fever. But just remember, it's optional. So business visitors, that's really your choice. It's your choice, but you can require it. If it's your workplace that you have the dominion over, you are allowed to require that, and it does protect your employees. Okay, somebody had a question about digital records. So this says, is it a problem to keep digital records rather than physical records by employee? No, it's not a problem. All types of records create their own issues. So paper files, are easier. You really don't know who's accessed a paper file. They rummaging through the filing cabinet one day. Physical or electronic files are a little bit easier to control access to. So it's not a bad idea to keep them digitally. And I also encourage people to keep them digitally, because if you need access to them in a point where you can't get in the office, then it's convenient to be able to have access if you need it. But if you're going to keep them digitally, you just want to be cognizant about who has access to the folders where they're being kept. And the number one thing, being cognizant of, if it's a shared folder, who has access. You don't want kind of like employees at the same grade to have access to each other's health information. It's really, their manager or the HR person, whoever it would be, it needs to seem appropriate for that person to have access to the record. It's okay to have couple people have access. They just need to make sure they're like in the appropriate roles, and treat the information confidentially. So that's the scheme on that. Okay, so if you're taking temperature at the door, the employee has a fever, what do you do? Obviously, you have to send them home. And pursuant to the CDC guidelines, they're not supposed to come back until they haven't had a fever for over 72 hours. So they are not even invited back the next day. So where does this come from? It's from the COVID rules on when can somebody come back after they had COVID, which we're going to do next. But generally, it's after they've made it through the whole process and they're not having any more symptoms, and they haven't had any of the symptoms for 72 hours. So because it could be an incubation period and things like that, they want you to wait. So just imagine you have everybody back in the workplace and people are going left and right out on fever leave, right? So what do you do? We're going to talk about that next after this COVID slide. So the COVID slide, what happens? Somebody tests positive for COVID-19. Now, I don't have a testing slide, I'm going to have to add that, but you are allowed to do COVID-19 testing at work when it's readily available. Right now, there's not enough tests out that I've even heard of people getting tested at work, or I don't even know if they're rapid enough to use, but eventually they may be. And the CDC has said that testing will be allowed as a reason to keep people out, just kind of like the fever temperature taking is. But right now, the way someone would get notified at work that they tested positive for COVID would likely be they took a test and they just got the results back. So the results have come back and they're at work. Maybe they check their email and they say, okay, well, that's shocking. I didn't even feel bad and I have COVID. And they're supposed to tell you. So you want to let your employees know they're supposed to come and notify you, something good to tell them. And then you're supposed to immediately notify the state and local health departments. So what's going to happen? Somebody's going to come out and show up at your door and say, where's your contact log? You know, how have you been implementing your cleaning policy? So that's why you want to keep this stuff and be ready, so that if you're never going to know, this is going to happen to a lot of people and just be surprising. So you do want to make sure you're cognizant, have all this stuff ready. And then they're going to help you or do it on your behalf. I'm not sure exactly, you know, it depends on who you're working with. Contact anybody that you have a record of this person being in contact with, which includes workers, visitors, anybody on that list within a certain amount of time. I'm not sure if it's like a week or 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure. But one thing I really want you to be cognizant of is that employers are not allowed to confirm the health status of a certain employee or communicate about their health. So what does that mean? This is an example of what an employer should say to the other employees if someone tests positive. So you learn that, you know, somebody tested positive, they might have been exposed, and they should contact the health department. Notice it doesn't say who. And so you're not supposed to say who. That's a really important point because it's their medical record, it's their personal private information. So even though you're supposed to know as the employer, you're supposed to keep it to yourself. So just be very cognizant of that. Okay, so somebody went out on COVID leave. When can they come back? Like you're saying, if they actually had it, they tested positive, or they have all the symptoms, you're supposed to wait for 10 days to pass. They've had it, they need to be out at least 10 days, and then they can come back after they haven't had any symptoms for 72 hours after 10 days. So, you know, it could go on longer, but once they've had no symptoms, they're completely over it, they can come back. Another scheme the CDC has is testing, meaning if they get retested, you know they had it, and then eventually they get tested and they test negative, that's a sign they can come back. And that's okay too. You can follow anything the CDC has on its website, but this is just the general guidance. And then when it comes to quarantine, the quarantine is when a medical doctor or one of these contact tracing people instructs somebody to quarantine because they have been in close contact with somebody who has confirmed COVID. That's what I mean by quarantine. If that happens to somebody, they're supposed to be out for 14 days because that's the incubation period. And that's why it's longer than when somebody tests positive for it, because somebody testing positive is already into it. So if they are out for 14 days and they're feeling great, they can come right back. If they're feeling bad, they have to wait till they've had no symptoms for over 72 hours, and then they can come back. Okay, so the big question is, well, what happens? You know, okay, somebody tested positive, I sent them home. Well, okay, so now what? They have to be out. So the first thing is that they are allowed to work from home. Obviously, this needs to be something where they can work from home. You know, not everybody has a work from home job, but they can work from home. They're allowed to, as long as they're feeling well. If they say, hey, I'm not really feeling good, they don't have to work. They can take leave. So if they can't work or work from home or telework, they don't feel well, then these are their options. So first, it's the Family First Coronavirus Response Act leave, which we discussed with the poster. So this is leave that's provided to every employer has to provide. You actually get reimbursed from the government for money paid out under this leave, but it's the equivalent of 2 weeks of a full-time employee, or 2 weeks full-time equivalent for part-time, which means if they usually work 3 days a week, then they get 3 days a week off 2 weeks in a row, basically. So first they use up that. Let's say they're still sick. They got really sick. Then they want to go ahead and use up any other leave that you gave them under your regular leave requirements that they've earned. And if they get past all that, they're out of leave and they're not at work, then they can apply for New York paid family leave and disability. There's sort of a combined COVID application for this. And what that is, it's an insurance program we all pay into. It's not out of your pocket, but it'll help the employee get some money while they're not able to work. So that's how you handle that. And in the package that I sell, oh, here we go. So that's the conclusion of the webinar. I have to start putting the time longer because I can't do it in an hour. But I just want to review with you guys, and I'm happy to take any questions now too about anything. Let me review real quick what I'm offering in my little legal package, and then I'll take the other questions that I have. So first we have a 50 question Q&A on reopening. And so this is everything in here plus a lot more. Basically, if it's a scenario with an employee upon reopening, I tried to put it in there. So it's a go-to when something happens, you want to start there. So that took a long time to put together, honestly. So I think that's a really good value, and it has a lot of resources in there. Then I include an employee disclosure and release. So what is this? You're going to be implementing all these new policies, right? Because you have to. But it's really, really good idea to get your employee's signature on a document that says that you've made them aware of these policies, that they agree to abide by them. Because now if they don't, it becomes a reason for discipline and or firing offense. So you've got proof that you notified them of these new changes. So I highly encourage you guys to get in writing from your employees, disclose information about all these new procedures, and then get their signatures acknowledged. They're gonna comply to keep everybody safe. So that's included, I think is a really good value. The draft safety plan, like I said, you can get that online, but I included in there just for easy access. And then I have a health questionnaire. My health questionnaire is really just those 3 questions plus a question about whether they have a fever, which I point out is optional. If you want to add other questions, you can, but just remember, the more questions, the more likely people are going to have something and not come in. So, what you want to put on there is going to be your choice. The log, a draft communication plan, which helps you think through how to appoint somebody as a point person, and to make sure somebody's in charge of collecting all the employee information and the contact log. A cleaning policy where you can fill it out to which areas you want to have on it. Cleaning log that you could put in any area. Contact tracing log with the categories we talked about. The FFCRA poster, which is available from the Department of Labor. Example social distancing posters, and the optional temperature check employee document. So all of these are included for the low price. This is actually a special price of $149.99 for this webinar. So if you're interested in ordering it, I'll send you guys a follow-up email. You can actually order it right through this link. You go to this link. If you copy and paste it or you want to screenshot it, right, you pay online, and then when you pay it, it just auto emails you this package. So if you're interested in that, you could go ahead and order it, or I'll send you more information about it. I also have, individualized advising if you want to talk about reopening or talk through things that are going to individually relate to your business. I have a reduced 1-hour strategy plan. Oops. That's available. So I'm happy to, work individually with anybody with more specific questions. So I'm going to go back to the group chat real quick. So we have somebody that said they have a small place where it's not really going to be private. How do we handle not identifying who's the symptomatic person? That's a really good question. So if it's a really small group, there's 3 people in the room and 1 person's not in, it's not going to be your fault. It's not going to be your fault that the people have figured it out. It's not going to be your fault. what the overarching principle is that the other people are notified that they may have been exposed. That's the overarching. As long as you don't say their name, it's not your fault that someone figures it out. And they may, I mean, the person may be best friends with them, and that person can call and tell their best friend at work, and they can call anybody at work and tell anybody they want to, and now everybody knows. As long as it wasn't you that made the disclosure, then you're going to be okay, because it's out of your hands. If you're in a small office, everybody's going to know. It's going to be blatant because they're not coming in. So that was a really tricky question. I never thought about that. And as somebody asked to see the example language, I'm just going to back up a couple of slides. There it is. This is the example language. I'm going to take a screenshot of that, of what you can say. You can email this, like this communication, because it doesn't have the person's name. It's their notification. Obviously, even these notifications, you know, to the extent not everybody was exposed, you know, if you're in a larger workplace, you know, you even want to keep these, you know, private. So we have another question. Okay, if an employee shows symptoms, do we need to ask them to wait at least 72 hours before returning to work? Yes, you do. And so if somebody is basically not allowed to come into work because they're having symptoms, the option is, number one, they can work from home if they're able to. So it's not that they can't work, they just can't come in. If they can't work from home, or they really don't feel good, they really do have a headache and fever, then they can take the coronavirus leave. And so anytime it comes up with these symptoms, it's generally going to be enough to trigger the coronavirus leave. Because people are going to freak out. They're going to be like, well, you know, how is an employer going to pay all these, half the staff's at home with you know, temperature, headache, every other day? You know, how can you survive? And the truth is that, you know, you aren't obligated to pay them when they're not healthy enough to come in. But that's what this federal leave is supposed to alleviate. But if you have further questions on any of these issues, it can be tricky. Once these policies start to get implemented and you start actually running into the problem, that's when you're going to go back to the 50 question Q&A and try to figure out, you know, how can I handle this? What am I legally allowed to do? And that's what I tried to do in the Q&A, is to give you some guidelines so that you can feel confident about what you're doing. But honestly, if a certain situation occurs that you're not comfortable with, that's a great time to reach out to an attorney to confirm before, you know, you take one step and cause another problem, because being an employer is tricky, and there's a lot of exposure out there, and all of these rules is not helping it. So all we can really do as employers is know the rules, try to do our best to reasonably abide by them, and try to work with your employees, you know, understand where they're coming from too, in this big effort to keep everybody safe. So it's quite a time. So I'll pause the recording. I really appreciate everybody attending. I'm going to pause.